Hello, beautiful people, and welcome, hi, to Dehya's post-release analysis. Now, usually, I wait like a week or two after the character's release to do the post-release. But with Dehya, I've been playing her a lot more than most characters, and also, I think that she's a lot easier to figure out because she's just so glaringly shit at basically everything that I have a pretty solid. I'm pretty confident in my understanding of her kit and in my ability to go through what I got right and what I got wrong in the pre-release. As usual, for the post-release, what we do is we go through the pre-release video and we basically just look at what we got right, look at what we got wrong, correct any potential mistakes, and yeah, so let's get started. Her HP scalings are a joke. Her beta cycle went through... Yeah, so her HP scalings really are a joke. If you want to put it into perspective, we know how usually, like, on characters that have scaling on multiple things, you can put their, like, sands as one of those things, right? So, like, you think about using attack percent sands on a Hytham, for example, which is, like, not quite as good, but still fine. With Dehya, there is a bigger difference between attack and HP sands than between HP and defense sands. And she doesn't have defense scalings. Her HP scalings are technically there, but they're actually laughably bad. E. Your E is basically like a Kutsing E that leaves an Albedo E behind. The thing is, it doesn't deal a lot of damage. These are not talent levels 1, by the way, right? These are talent level 9. As we're gonna see later, if you're building her for burst damage, or if you're building her for her damage, you want to focus more on burst damage, so the good weapons are gonna be something like Aquamadu and stuff like that, and like the Joel, the fish. For now, we can just take a look at like Prototype Archaic, just like to get a baseline understanding of how much damage you're getting from that. Let's show what would happen if you were to actually build for E damage, so you went for something like Lava Walker. So the proc from your E, with Kazuha and Bennett buff active, would do about 8k damage. Her procs, depending on what team you play her in, whether or not they vape, whatever, all that. Like, the general thing you can expect at a baseline is closer to, I mean, you don't have VV, you don't have a Bennett buff. Let's show it, yes. I should have had Power Resonance, but whatever. With no buffs, 4k on a crit. I have like 45% crit chance, so average is like 3k. With buffs, 11k, but that's on a crit, and again, I have 45% crit rate, so the average is closer to like 7 to 8k. It's not a lot of damage. And then if everything goes right and you manage to vape it, if you're using Mona, you won't, because you only have enough Hydro App to vape like the hits from your burst, and then you're out of Hydro App. But let's say you're using Singto. $18k. Wow, it's not ideal. Now, right now, she is on Rain Slasher, which means that the non-vape damage could be a little bit higher, but you get the point, right? Like, getting a like 10-ish K average, I count this at around 8k. Honestly, it's around what it is, yeah, unsurprisingly, because usually math happens to, you know, work. And by the way, right, this is a over 200 CV double crown Dehya. Like, this is not a shitty build. Like, it's a good build. Point being, your E won't do a lot of damage. Also the initial cast of it, of course, but my point with this... And then the initial cast can be almost 2 times as much damage if you vape it. Pog. Even have the skill damage Abyss card. Let's go. $76k! Woo! 98k! Let's go! That's so much damage! And all it took was the kind of setup that would make Sailing hit for about that much as well. 5 times more often. It's okay. This is fine. Basically, her E's damage is mostly negligible, unfortunately. Oh, by the way, the E lasts for... Yeah, because, like, if you are playing her in a team like this, like, usually you have just enough Pyro App to vape every hit from your burst, or every vapeable hit from your burst, which means that none of your E hits will actually vape, right? Like, if you do an actual, like, normal setup, right? Like the E hits are not vaped. So surely that means that her burst damage is good, right? Let's get into that. Think of her burst as like Sino burst, but very short. And also, Singto and Yelan don't work. And anything that even mentions normal attacks just won't work. Okay, so because of that, that means they gave her like way bigger numbers to compensate, right? So without buffs, we're at about 7.5k per hit. So that must... Yeah, so we can take a look at it. I mean, hey. So without buffs... Right, non-crits for 3k, crits for 8k, with about 45% crit. So average is around 6 to 7k. Which is actually even less than what I had. That they gave her like 20 hits, right? No, she's got like 10. Most of the time, probably gonna be 9. Obviously, you can buff her. Ooh, very nice. Now we're at around 12k. Right, 14k on a crit, 5k on a non-crit. So yeah, around 10 to 12k. We can give her the VV back. Okay, VV, nice. Okay, I had not removed Kazuha, so... No, that's why this one was a little bit higher. Okay, but if we... So 15k with Kazuha. Alright, so 7k on a non-crit, 20k on a crit, 21k on a crit. So it's about 14, 15k average. Forgotten to do that, so... But yeah, that's fine. More or less. Kazuha. 15k, that's starting to be... That's a Hu Tao normal attack. It's not even a Hu Tao charge attack, man. But this is a 1, right? Surely it adds up when you put all of them together. So let's take a look at how much it adds up to. So this becomes our total damage. That's 240k. Insane. Well, no, that is not insane. With these buffs, you compare it to anyone else, and you realize, oh yeah, this is significantly lower. For context... If we just use this, right? We do about half of the Ruin Guard's health. So as you can see, with a character that can be swapped out, we actually dealt more damage than with a character that cannot be swapped out. On top of that, my Dehya doesn't have enough ER to sustainably do her rotations right now, whereas my Sangling actually does. So that means that she's just a bad carry with nothing they can do, right? Well, not exactly. There is a thing that she can do and other pyro carries can't really do. And that's how she can work with Mona. You can actually use Mona with her and still vape the vapeable hits on your burst. Or at least you should be able to. Right, you do your setup. Get Mona's burst in, Mona E, and then Dehya burst. As you can see, vape, vape, vape. Right, so all of our vapeable hits actually got vaped, and we managed to actually one-rotate the Ruin Guard. Now, the reason we managed to one-rotate is because we got pretty lucky with crit RNG. This is a crit fishing build, because otherwise I can't one-rotate it. but like, you can get damage, kinda. The problem is, at this level of investment, Hu Tao could kill the first 2 enemies in one rotation, whereas Dehya can only kill 1. It's fucking rough out here. Let me show the Hu Tao thing, because I don't want you to just take my word for it. My charge attack missed? Are you serious? Well, whatever. Right, but like, you can see the difference, right? And like I said, right, I don't actually have enough ER on my Dehya. I also don't actually have enough ER on my Mona, right? She's on 4-piece instructor, and like, we're barely getting by, you know? Which means that my rotations won't actually be 20 seconds, they'll be closer to like 30 seconds. But not only that, but the Rune Drake is actually quite a bit tankier than the Rune Guard, right? This guy, the Rune Drake Earth Guard, which means that I will actually struggle to one-rotate this enemy unless I get really lucky with crit RNG. So there's 4 enemies, each of which I can potentially one-rotate, but only with good RNG. That's at least 4 rotations, and realistically, they're like 30-second rotations. That's basically 2 minutes spent on the first half. In practice, my fastest clear so far with this team has been like 1 minute 48, but the average clear is closer to 2 minute 15, because the good clear, I got really good crit RNG. Let me actually show you what happens when you go past the first rotation with Dehya against this. Well, we got bad at crit RNG, so... Oh, and we got cancelled through our fucking E, so that's great. Okay, well now I gotta wait until the electro thing happens, because I have to remove it. Otherwise my character will just stop working, so that's good. Aw, you little shit. We didn't actually manage to cancel his thing. Well, I guess that means we're gonna have to do a second rotation on him, so that's great. I want to use my burst here. If I use my burst here, I'm not gonna do any damage on the other one. Now we gotta wait until he gets the electro infusion. And we gotta try to remove it. And then we can do our rotation. We're not getting lucky crits. That's... Okay, we got a crit at the end. That's good. But now we actually have to wait a whole ass fucking 15 seconds because we killed it right after the electro thing. Which means that if we do our setup now, we're just not gonna get our stuff. Okay, cool. Very nice. Might get us up 2 minutes. No, not quite. Close. Now we have 57 seconds left on the second chamber. So what you would generally get is you would get 6 of the normal hits unvaped, and then 3 of the normal hits plus the final hit would be vaped. Okay, so one thing, from what I understand, a decent amount of her kit is like ping dependent, but you actually get 10 hits plus the kick at low ping. I haven't played her on high ping, but I've been told that on high ping you get 9 hits plus the final kick. Maybe I've been lied to, honestly. I haven't actually bothered to double check. But anyways, you actually get 1 more hit than I expected in the pre-release. Well, it actually adds 1 vape. So because your 10th hit will also be vaped. However, most of the time, your Mona Burst will actually run out before your final kick. Which means that even though your final kick has a bigger number, it's generally going to be about the same amount of damage because your Mona Burst expired. 36 star is not that difficult. And if you try to play Dehya as a carry, you might unironically be unable to. Like, not just, oh no, you can't speedrun, but like, unironically, oh no, you can't clear in time. Yeah, like, I would not expect the average player to be able to 36 star with a team like this, even on the second side. I am unable to 36 star if I play this team on the first side, no matter what I put on the second side. I just can't, because I need like over 3 rotations to kill Simon, and there's no electro, so it just doesn't work. It's just not enough. If I do on the second half, I actually can 36 star with this team, but only because my first half gets hard fucking carried by Hyperloom and single target. And even then, it ends up pretty close. It's very disheartening to see things like this. Thing is though, there is a reason why she's this weak. And the reason is because she gives you defensive utility, which I haven't talked about yet. So, here's the thing about her defensive utility. Let's listen to my pre-release thoughts and then yeah. When your active character takes damage, a portion of that damage will be transferred to Dehya instead. Talent level 9 is 48, talent level 10 is 50, right? So about half of the damage that you take on your active character will be taken by Dehya instead. That's good. Like, that's nice. That's useful. She also has a passive where when her HP goes below 40% HP, you'll recover 20% of her max HP instantly, and then another 6% every 2 seconds for the next 10 seconds. That's another 30%, so 50%. But you basically get 50% of your HP back. Here's the thing about this. At the end of the day, Dehya is the only character that gets that healing. People very often need some form of defensive utility. The better you play, the less you need it. When you're playing with a healer, then you're just playing with a healer, right? You've got that going. Once you start learning the enemy's attack patterns a bit more, maybe you can get away with someone like Hu Tao instead, who gives you some damage reduction, damage resistance, whatever, and a little bit of healing, so that the damage that you do take, you can heal it back up if it's not too much. The thing about Dehya is because she doesn't actually offer any healing to other characters, most people are still gonna need a form of healing on top of her. At which point, that damage mitigation doesn't matter nearly as much. It's still there and it's still useful, but one main thing to remember about this is that other characters also have forms of defensive utility, but then on top of that, they're also not completely garbage. Right? You look at someone like Zhongli. Zhongli gives you significantly better defensive utility and reduces resistances. Hu Tao gives you better defensive utility, again, significantly better defensive utility, and is also just the insane unit to begin with. Bennett gives you a different type of defensive utility, but in the form of just having a ton of healing, but also gives you a massive attack buff. What does Dehya give with her defensive utility that makes her worth putting on your team? Well, if you build the whole team around her, she's gonna be a bad carry. And if you don't, she's applying a little bit of pyro, but not enough to actually be the trigger for a reaction. So effectively, she's not doing anything. You can use her with tenacity and get pyro resonance, I guess, maybe. And that's not completely useless, but she just doesn't provide anything else. Her like damage mitigation also is accompanied by resistance to interruption. And her first ascension passive, you get additional resistance to interruption. Now, they changed it very recently, and I haven't really had news about how much resistance to interruption this is. But if it's a lot of resistance to interruption, she might have a place where she could be worth putting. It is generally enough to basically prevent any form of interruption. Although there are still, I mean, the ability itself doesn't actually have that much resistance to interruption on the cast time, which means that you can get cancelled out of it, just like pre-buff Zhongli. But the biggest issue with the defensive utility is that the uptime on it is just really bad. Like, you've got, 12-second uptime on the damage mitigation, which means almost half the time you don't have it. And then on top of that, you only have 9 seconds on the resistance to interruption. It's so bad. In terms of uptime. The place where she could be useful for this is specifically in burn melt Ganyu teams, where you don't really need fast pyro, you just need some form of pyro. Technically you can get away without any pyro, but having pyro makes it easier to play. You can play Ganyu, Bennett, Dehya, Nahida, right? It's effectively replacing Zhongli with her. You'd lose out on the resistance shred, but in exchange, you would get more consistent burning, and it would probably be easier to meld all of your stuff. That's kind of the only place where she actually has a purpose in a team over other units. And the only reason she does is because your other alternative for a team like that is Thoma, and Thoma requires normal attacks. And Melt Ganyu does not want to do normal attacks. Effectively, you can look at it one of two ways. Either I play her with her burst. I actually use her burst. If you do, well, your burst isn't going to do any damage without any buffs. So if you play her with buffs, and like as a hyper, she's a worse version of Xinyan. She's not exactly a worse version of Xinyan. She's more like an alternative to Xinyan with similar output. And worse quality of life and a lot of auto-targeting problems, but similar output. Option 2, you don't really play her for her burst, and you focus on the E for the application and utility it gives. In which case, unless you're in a team that can't normal attack, she's a worse version of Thoma. Pick your poison. Worse Xinyan or worse Thoma. Yeah, so honestly, I really do think that Thoma's better than her in most situations. So something that some people might not know is that when you have a shield, you also basically have infinite resistance to interruption. And Thoma's shield actually has more than 100% uptime. Because Thoma's shield lasts 8 seconds, but the duration gets refreshed whenever his burst wave goes through. And if it gets destroyed, well, he gets it back when a burst wave goes through, right? Which means that as long as you keep auto-attacking, you have resistance to interruption. Right? So you also have basically infinite resistance to interruption, but unlike Dehya, you actually have good uptime on it, right? It's not just 9 seconds of resistance to interruption, it's basically for your whole rotation. Because his burst lasts for 15 seconds at a baseline, 18 seconds with C2. But let's say you don't have C2, even then, 15 seconds at a baseline for his burst duration, which means that you get your shield from when you're, well, you use your EQ, right? So when your burst starts, and then for up to 8 seconds after your burst is over. So up to 23 seconds. 26 seconds if you have C2. And the cooldown on it is 20. Generally, you care more about the resistance to interruption than you care about the damage mitigation from Dehya's stuff. And Toma just gives you such better resistance to interruption. The quality of life of it is just so much better. So most of the time, you just rather play Toma. And so unless you don't have a way to do normal attacks, which like for example in Ganyu Meld, you can argue that you don't want to use normal attacks. In other teams, generally like you'd just rather use Toma because he's just better. There is like one exception to that, which is if your unit just like gets one shot easily, but then you'd rather just use Xingqiu instead, right? Because Xingqiu offers actually more defensive utility than Dehya, and also has 100% uptime on it. Like, his damage reduction is a little bit less than Dehya's damage mitigation, but the healing when your rain swords expire generally more than makes up for it. 6% per sword, right? He's got 4 swords with C1, so that's 24% of his max health. Mine is at 16k max health, so 24% of that is about 4k. And his damage reduction is at 42% versus Dehya's 50%. If crowned, which means that in order for Dehya's damage mitigation being 8% higher to give you more defensive utility than Xingqiu's like healing, you need to take 50,000 damage pre-mitigation per rotation. That's a lot. Most of the time, Xingqiu's like it helps you to prevent damage more. And then also, like, Xingqiu's just a good unit who does a lot of damage. It's painful because I actually really like what they did with the way that the burst worked with Mona. Actually having Mona be a vape enabler for a vape carry is just cool. Yeah, it is. It really is. And not only that, but one thing that I ended up realizing recently is that even with her C6, which increases duration, there can be a way for Mona to work to vape every vapeable hit. So Mona's burst, right, when the bubble pops, when the omen like explodes, it applies 2 units of Hydro. The thing is, it shares internal cooldown with the initial application of the omen. So if you trigger it quickly, then it won't apply any Hydro at all. So you'll only get the Hydro from your E. Which generally is what happens because you don't want to just fucking stare at the enemy for 3 seconds, right? And so when you have C6 Dehya, because her burst lasts longer, you won't vape every hit. However, if you're against enemies that have stagger immunity, which some enemies have, Mona's Omen won't pop when you start attacking them because Mona's Omen doesn't pop from damage, it pops from stagger. Which means that if the enemy is immune to stagger, the bubble will stay on the enemy for longer before exploding. Which means that you actually can get the 2 units of Hydro application from the bubble's explosion. And so if you're doing something like against the Raiden Shogun boss, after you get the shield phase down, you can actually get your full burst to have all of the vapeable hits, all of the pyro applications vape. Which is cool, right? It feels like there's just a bunch of things that like, everything lines up really well with the gauge and all of that. And the kit is just really cool. And then they just made the numbers complete trash. What they need to do for her to be good? Well, basically they need to double her numbers. She's kind of just that far behind, yeah. Oh, actually, yeah. I am reminded of another issue I haven't talked about yet. When you use your burst, it retrieves your skill, it takes it off of the field, and basically pauses the duration, and then puts it back at the end of the burst. Okay, I mean, that just means that your burst is effectively used to make it so that your E lasts longer. Your E's like power application is more evenly distributed throughout your rotation because you don't apply more power while you're bursting, which is good. Which, yeah, but also you generate energy when your E procs, which means that when you're in your burst, she's not generating energy, which means that in this abyss, it's actually not that bad because the enemies that are in this current abyss actually drop a lot of HP particles. So you don't actually notice the ER requirements that much until you get to Simon, basically. Right? Because like these enemies drop a lot of particles, and then these enemies drop a decent amount. And then you get to Simon and it's like, oh, fuck me. I don't have enough ER anymore. Oh shit. Oh, okay. Most of her energy generation is gonna happen when she's not on the field. It also means that you don't get your own mitigation when you're in your burst. So not only do you not have any of that defensive utility, right? You don't have any of that damage mitigation, but also you're still taking damage from having mitigated damage for your other units before. Which means that especially from like the second rotation onwards, if you don't dodge that much, you're just gonna die in your burst. But honestly, the biggest problem with that is just that she stops generating energy in her burst, which means that most of... Yeah, so unironically, like, you can't just face tank shit with like in Dehya's burst. Because the uptime is so short, dodging is a massive DPS loss, and it's really easy to get one shot. And so you're just sitting there like, man, what do I do? Her energy generation happens when she's not on field. Or you can keep her on field and then the rest of your team doesn't generate any energy. Effectively, because of that and because of the fact that she just doesn't generate that much energy to begin with, her ER requirements are actually pretty high. If you do end up playing her in that Mona team, she needs somewhere around 180-ish ER. I was using 170, assuming that you're going Fab Kazuha and Fab Mona. Your ER requirements are insanely high. And the thing about that is, usually, right, when you have... And so like, the reason why I'm not currently running Dehya on this much ER is because if I go the normal amount of ER on Dehya, then I lose damage, and I won't actually be able to one-rotate a Ruin Guard. Which means that I'll need to get a second burst on the Ruin Guard, and then I'll overkill it from the second burst, which means that I'll basically be wasting a lot of my rotation. So I found that in my case, the best way to go about it is actually to just have a 30-second rotation, because her damage is just so fucking low that it's almost just better to slow down the it's just, ugh. If you're not against multi-wave content like that, then you'd still want to go high ER. But because it's so hard for her to reach the DPS breakpoints to actually one-rotate single enemies, then sometimes it's actually worth it to run low ER just to get higher damage, which is just... Bad units, it's not the end of the world because you can still just use them in overworld because you like them. The thing about Dehya is her E doesn't do any damage, so like all of her damage is in her burst, and she's very energy hungry, which means that in overworld she's also gonna feel shitty. Like it goes, that's not actually entirely true. So what I've found is that because her damage without any buffs is so fucking terrible, you can actually use your burst, use all of it, and the enemies are still not dead, which means that you can then battery her with Bennett's E. Well, usually when you have characters like that, you can just give them more ER or a Fav weapon in overworld. You look at Xiao, for example, you can just give him Fav. The thing is, if you give Fav to Dehya, her damage that's already pretty bad becomes even worse. Yeah, that's true. I did something for fun earlier. That is true. I compared her output to Hu Tao, and saw at which constellation Dehya starts dealing more damage than Hu Tao if you play Dehya with the Mona team, and Hu Tao just in a normal team that has Xingqiu. So even before taking into account Xingqiu's damage, Dehya was still doing less at C5, and it was at C6 that she got ahead. Now obviously Dehya's AoE is a bit larger, but it's not that large. Okay, also another thing that I have noticed from actually like playing it in practice, the enemies don't stay grouped during your Q. You just knock them away from each other. The auto-targeting on it is fucking weird, so you'll go like, hoo. What the fuck is she doing, man? It doesn't feel very good in AoE. It's not too bad against the Kenkis, because if they group themselves, then you can actually deal damage to all of them. It's like just barely just large enough for it. But the other enemies, it feels like trash. That was C0 Hu Tao with the Dragon's Bane. And it's not because Dehya's constellations don't do anything. Like from C0 to C6, you like triple your damage. C0 to C6 plus the 5-star weapon at R1, you like quadruple your damage. It's just because she starts from so far behind. Like her constellations are... So that is, again, right, without looking at support's damage, and because she doesn't work with Xingqiu, like support's damage actually matter a lot. And when you actually do start looking at supports damage, she is kind of just behind Hu Tao, even when she's at C6. Anecdotally, I've tried a C6 Dehya on someone else's account with her signature weapon, and I was clearing slower than when I play Hu Tao on my account by a pretty significant margin. A decent increase, but she starts from so bad that even with them, she's just fine. Does that mean that she's completely doomed? Well, in her current state, yes, but not really. Because, like I said earlier, it's very likely we're gonna get an artifact set for her. Okay, let's talk about that. So we have had like more proper leaks about the artifact set. HP plus 20%, and then gain 10% elemental skill and elemental burst damage bonus. When the equipping character takes damage, this basic effect is increased by 80% for 8 seconds. Max 5 stacks, whatever. So you can get up to 10 plus 400%. Well, it's 400% of 10. So it's 50 total, right? It's 10 plus 40. You can get up to 50% elemental skill and elemental burst damage. That's a decent amount. But here's the thing. Like I said earlier, HP actually doesn't do much for her damage, and her elemental skill damage is not that good. Most of her damage, if you actually use your burst, comes from her burst. So the 2-piece is like kind of useless, and the 4-piece, a part of it doesn't do that much. Here's the thing. Emblem is also very good on her, right? Emblem gives a 2-piece ER, which she really needs, and the 4-piece gives you a pretty reasonable amount of burst damage bonus. When you are at the 170, 180 ER that you're gonna need, it's almost as much as this 50%. The thing is, with that, like the ER from the 2-piece just being so much better for her stat distribution than the HP, right? ER on your set bonus means that you don't need as much ER on your substats or main stats, which lets you get away with more crit or attack in your substats. With the ER being so much better than the HP 2-piece, at those levels of ER, Emblem is actually just kind of better for her damage. Which means that this artifact set is only good for her when she doesn't need that much ER. And she only doesn't need that much ER when either you're speedrunning and only doing one rotation, which C6R5 whales struggle to one rotate an Abyss boss with Dehya. Like that's how fucking shitty this is. Or you have her C4, which gives you a bunch of energy. So basically, this artifact set is only really a substantial upgrade on C4 plus Dehya. On pre-C4 Dehya, in some situations it will be a slight upgrade because this 50% elemental burst damage is still generally more than what Emblem gives you. So if you don't need that much ER, then this can be an upgrade. But most of the time, it's gonna be at most like a 1 to 2% increase on her actual DPS. Which is, well, about 1/100th of what she needs. She needs her damage to be fucking doubled to be good. That artifact set does not do that. I would expect the artifact set to increase her output by like maybe somewhere between 10 and 25%. I don't expect it to be. This is the face of a man who is just completely clueless. This is the face of a man who does not know, who is unaware, completely and utterly unaware. Be anything more than that. If it were 25%, she'd still be pretty bad. It's sad, and I'm gonna go for her anyways, and I'm gonna struggle to clear Abyss with her anyways. Yeah. But yeah, yep, both of those statements are very true. And if you're going for her, you should be too. And if you like her, and you don't care. Was it release recorded before we knew she was going to standard? Yeah, it was. I added a few things from, like, when we learned that, but there's a few times where I reference things that aren't actually like necessarily accurate with her going to standard. That's good. I'm not telling you that you can't go for her. I would just like, as much as possible, to try to ensure that you know what you're getting yourself into. If, like me, you're telling yourself, hey, it's fine. 3.6 artifact set will save her. Just remember, units get reruns. You can always wish for a unit that you skip, but you can't skip for a unit that you wished. You can't unwish for a unit. It's always better to hold off, to be a little bit too safe, than to be a little bit too trigger happy with your Primogems. Obviously, she's pretty unlikely to get a rerun as a standard unit. However, I would also argue that it doesn't really matter anymore because I have lost all of my Hopium, I have lost all of my Copium, I don't think they're gonna make her better anymore. I have completely given up. If you want a unit that's actually good, don't go for Dehya. And if you want to go for Dehya, just make sure that you're okay with having a unit that just sucks. Because she does. And it's probably not gonna get better. Go through her weapon options. I mean, yeah. High Refined Aquamaru can be better than some of the like attack percent statistics if you play with Bennett. So I had it like a little tiny bit ahead. Guard Pride is also okay. It's just like it's a stat stick. She needs the ER, but the passive is useless on her. Serpent Spine sucks, but it's like okay if you're one rotating content, which you're not because it's Dehya, but like if hypothetically you were one rotating content, you can also just never use your E, which makes you lose a bunch of particles, but it lets you get your Serpent Spine stacks. So if the enemies drop a lot of HP particles, you can just decide to not use your E so that your Serpent Spine works. Or you can just make sure that you don't get hit. True. Another thing about the weapons, I didn't actually mention Rain Slasher, because it's not that much better than Mailed Flower. But Rain Slasher is actually a pretty decent option. If you have R5 Rain Slasher, it's slightly better than R5 Mailed Flower when you're doing Vape. So that's something I should have mentioned here. It's the weapon I'm actually using most of the time. Because, well, I'm not using a 0-stack Serpent Spine. No thank you. And I haven't leveled the Mailed Flower yet. And, I mean, I actually just recently got my R5 Rain Slasher. On the Dehya banner, actually. I was at R4 beforehand, and I got R5 from it. So the game knew. What can I say? Okay. Also, another thing that I want to add is a few other like quality of life issues, I guess is what we're gonna call them. So when you jump during her burst, it just cancels the burst, which is like, oh, okay. So they just gave players a way to cancel the burst, which is good, right? Well, here's the thing: when you get frozen, you gotta mash out of it by pressing spacebar. Which means that if you get frozen during her burst, you can't mash out of it. Because if you mash spacebar, you'll jump. And if you jump, you'll cancel your burst. Also, right, there's a few pretty popular clips. Right, so there are many characters that can struggle with targeting, but as you can quite clearly see from this, Dehya sure as fuck is one of them. You have a special place in my heart. So she hit like what, 3 of her burst hits? That's what I meant with the like whoo. It's bad. Yeah. It's kind of like they just didn't give a shit. Like it truly is. Like what the fuck, man. Artifact sets. I didn't end up mentioning Crimson Witch in the video, which I should have. Crimson Witch is okay. It's still worse than Emblem if you play her Vape, and if you don't play her Vape, you don't want Crimson Witch. You can go 4-piece TOM. You can go 4-piece Instructor. You could go Noblesse, but there's no reason to go Noblesse over TOM. You could go Exile, but there's no reason to go Exile over TOM. I guess Lava Walker as well is technically doable. But yeah, and then 4-piece Flop / 4-piece Gilded. Best in slot for Burgeon, but like I said earlier, she won't be very good in Burgeon. Yeah, so about that. At a baseline, her kit doesn't lend itself very well to Burgeon because it's very slow pyro hits with bad uptime, and during her burst, she doesn't work with the best Hydro units. But then on top of that, wait a second. Wait a goddamn second. It didn't hit the seed! Some enemies' hitbox is too high! Not only does her kit itself not lend itself all that well to Burgeon, but also the AoE of it, of her E hit, is really small. Like much smaller than Raiden's E hit, which means that there are actually quite a few enemies whose hitbox is like too big, so the center of their hitbox is too far away from where the seeds get generated. So it just doesn't Burgeon. With Raiden, it's a thing that happens only on like very large enemies, like the Golden Wolf Lord. But it can actually happen on Rune Graders with Dehya. So that's a thing that I now am aware of and that I'm not happy with. Melt, Ganyu, yeah. Assuming that her resistance. So okay, when you play her just like for her E, you like optimal build would be attack, pyro, crit, because that's still how she does the most damage, and her utility doesn't really scale that well with her HP. Like, it's useful, but it's not like that big of a deal. But the thing is, because her damage is so fucking dog shit, it just doesn't really matter that much. Like, yeah, you can build her attack, pyro, crit, but like, it's not gonna change how fast you're clearing. Instead of hitting for 1k, he's gonna hit for 3k. Like, oh. Yeah, assuming that her resistance interruption is good enough not to need a shielder, then this is fine. Like, this is her best option. This is realistically the only team where I feel like there's an actual reason to play her over the alternatives. Yeah, I think that's fair. Although, because her resistance interruption lasts such a short amount of time, I still wouldn't recommend her over the other option. I think it's fine to play her there, but it wouldn't be the first thing that comes to mind as a recommendation, for sure. Burgeon, significantly worse than Toma. Dehya, worse than Diluc. Mono, Pyro, about as good as Shinyan. Yeah. It's better if you're Shinyan C0. Hu Tao, Vape, technically not garbage. Yeah, you can use her for defensive utility in Hu Tao Vape instead of someone like Zhongli with the, like, if you have double Hydro, it works. Hyper Bloom, don't use her abilities. Fine, I guess. Like, that's what we're resorting to? Use them instead. I think that's the best way to put it, actually. These are the depths that we're scraping. Yeah. I guess Air Fryer, for those of you who don't know, Air Fryer is when you use animal units to trigger burning. And with Nahida, you can maintain like 100% burning uptime and pyro uptime. And you get a bunch of pyro swirls. It's not the greatest team in single target, but it functions and it's pretty good in AoE. True and real. But as you can see in single target, not the best. But it is actually pretty good in AoE because you get some like pseudo quadratic scaling and your damage is like basically very, very AoE. Bad. You don't want to play her in Air Fryer. I like how I just went through all of that just to say that she sucks in Air Fryer, but yeah, she's pretty bad in Air Fryer. Why play her instead of Bennett? Because you're gonna die. Air Fryer can actually do damage to yourself, and if you need a defensive option, you'd rather use Bennett, and if your Bennett's busy, you'd rather use a Pyro Shielder because burning is pyro damage, so Pyro Shields are 2.5 times as effective as they usually are, right? So Toma or C4 Yanfei, even Shinyan, is something you'd rather use. Like, I don't even know what to say, man. This is the first time where I'm seriously considering a Constellation. Because I want to get her, because I think she's cool, but she's gonna feel so fucking unplayable at C0 that I'm unironically considering like getting a few Constellations. Speaking of which, let's go through her cons real quick. I've kind of changed my mind about that. It's not fucking worth it, man. HP increased by 20%. So not worth it. Bonus. But yeah, one team that I didn't include here that I probably should have is hyper carry teams. The same teams where you'd use Toma, and yeah, she is just the worst version of Toma most of the time, but she does work with something like Wanderer, for example. Probably should have. I should have put that here. I didn't because I forbore. Like when she comes out, you'll probably see some showcases from C0R1 or C0R0 Dehya, where you actually do get like 100k hit on your burst at C0R0 with like really good artifact. That's a thing that is very possible to happen. Yeah. Just remember, like, I get like when my day is fully buffed, I get close to 100k. Well, yeah, you can also, another thing that we found out is you can actually get her to do the kick early if you dash jump, which is weird, but like I guess it's pretty cool. $97, come on. Come on. That would have been 100k if it was on the last chamber with like a couple more Abyss buffs. Like Abyss cards, I mean.
Okay.
I didn't dash. I didn't dash, I just jumped, so my burst just cancelled. Oh, good times. And crit, we go again. We go again. $135K. Sheesh. But yeah, like you can do a like reasonably decent-ish number, but like it ain't great, you know. If you actually look at her DPS while her burst is active, it is actually pretty similar to Hu Tao. The main difference is basically just that her animations are significantly longer to get to that burst, and she doesn't have that DPS. Yeah, like okay, yeah, like you look at the damage during this, and like it's not that bad. Like this is okay. But her uptime is so much lower than other units. Her animation times are honestly so long. With all of those buffs, that's all she can do. And so, it's like, while she's in her thing, it kind of feels like she's a good unit. And then her burst is over, and then you realize that it's been 2 minutes and the chamber is still not done. And it's like, oh, I understand now. Right, like if I go back to my Hu Tao, I'm not gonna bother giving her the good Pyro Goblet. I'll give her a slightly less good Pyro Goblet, just I don't have to keep fucking swapping. Like I could play Hu Tao with Mona as well, and it's not ideal, but... Oops. Like, I can do that too. Like, it works. She can do it too, except she doesn't have to. And it's obviously not a popular team because it's bad. like, come on, man. Fuck. God damn it! This character doesn't work with Mona. This is not like a consistent thing that you can do all the time. Like honestly, I wonder if I can actually like one shot it if I'm below 50% HP. I think that might kill me, so I don't want to risk it. There we go. See, like I can literally just play burst bot Hu Tao when it's fucking about as fast. Like, and that's while letting myself get fucking whacked on for like, it's more than 10 seconds, like almost 30 seconds at the beginning. Like, fuck. You probably get it by now. Like, I'm happy with her. Like, obviously I wish she wasn't this bad, but I knew what I was getting into wishing on her banner. And I got what I was expecting. I just want to make sure that you also know what you're getting into, because if you're not ready for it, you will not be enjoying yourself. All right, maybe if you do like AD, right click, E, dash, jump, Q, it triples her burst damage. I think that does it for the pre-release. I predicted the dash jump trick true, real. You really do want to force her. The best results that you'll get are going to be in Mono Pyro with Tingling, or and you might be alright with Ganyu Melt, again, right? Like it depends on how much resistance or interruption you get. You'll get good results out of playing her in a Hyper Bloom team where you don't use any of her skills, just because, yeah, 3-unit Hyper Bloom team is good. You can actually use her skill in a Hyper Bloom team and just have some of those Hyper Blooms be Burgeons instead. It's not like that's too bad. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. It's just not looking great. Anyways, everything about her is worse than I expected. You know? Okay, you know what? That's not actually true. There is one thing about her that's better than I expected, and that's how fun it is to not kill enemies. How fun it is to actually be able to go through a full rotation against an enemy. So honestly, mostly accurate pre-release. Things that I like forgore and like should have mentioned. Like hyper teams like Wanderer, where she's fine, but still generally worse than Toma. I think this is one of my most accurate pre-releases so far, apart from a little bit of the cope that I injected into myself in this portion of the video. Yeah, there are ways that they could have made her better, and they won't, because they don't care. Like, they very clearly don't care. That'll be that. I hope you enjoyed your stay. I hope you learned a thing or two, and I hope you're not as disappointed as I am, because honestly, man. But yeah, don't forget to do the usual YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, check me out on Twitch, and yeah, I'll see you guys around. Bye, YouTube.